In this episode, we are going to be talking about the 1981 film Prince of the City, which was directed by Sidney Lumet, which he also co-wrote along with Jay Presson Allen, and it stars Treat Williams. My guest today is Dave Voigt. I want to welcome him back. He is a film critic and the host of the In the Seats podcast. Dave, welcome back so soon. This is great.
Well, Robert, thanks for having me as always, my friend. This is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, so I'm glad you brought me in.
Oh, I'm glad you feel that way because I feel the exact same way. I love this film, but I've always been a major fan of Lumet, and I'm curious, when did you start to get interested in his films in general?
Well, I mean, I probably would say, late high school, early university, just when personally my sort of own film experience was starting to sort of open up a bit more, and sort of I would learn, I would discover like so many of these movies from the 70s that he did, and just really, I think it was right at the time when my palette really started to open up sort of cinematically, as it were.
Is there something specific about his films that attract you the most? Is there some kind of through line that really bring you back to his movies?
Well, I mean, there's a few answers to that, to be honest. I think it was just probably came down to things like performances. I mean, I think the thing that really was the one that stood out for me first was Network.
Yeah, oh God,
and then sort of embracing that and discovering sort of the genius around that, which I loved. And then I got to discover Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico, and even stuff like The Verdicts and even Power from later in the 80s. I mean, he did such great stuff, a lot of which doesn't necessarily get the love it deserves, and I think this kind of qualifies in that category.
Well, this film in particular, because it's, well, obviously today we look back on, as you mentioned, Dog Day Afternoon, Network, people quote lines from them, they're so well known, but this is a film that is not very well known and did not do, I think it barely broke even at the time in the box office, and kind of got mixed reviews. It was unfairly sort of pitted against or compared to Serpico, which on the surface is the same kind of story, but this is very, very different. But I think this is one of his finest films, in my opinion. So I'm curious, how many times have you seen it, and how have your feelings changed about it over time?
I would say probably 3 or 4, maybe 5, around that area of times that I've actually watched it. And it's, again, I think the more I watch it, the more I get an appreciation of what a fascinating character piece this is. Because, and really, when you look at the history of it all, and I mean, and not just sort of the true story that it's inspired by, but when you look at someone like Treat Williams, who didn't necessarily have a lot of screen credits, and when you look at the other people in the film, it's like, these are all, like, this is a film basically made up of New York character actors. There are no stars in this film.
Yeah, which is something that Lumet insisted on, because I'm sure originally Brian DePalma was going to do this with De Niro. Yeah. And I don't know exactly what happened in terms of the studio gave it to Lumet, and I think DePalma to this day is still quite upset about that, and almost as a revenge. I don't know if it was revenge, but because then Lumet was supposed to do Scarface, and then DePalma ended up doing it. But I think I don't know what DePalma would have been like with this kind of material. This to me is perfect and purely Lumet. I remember the first time I saw it, I had already known a number of his films, had been a big fan, and had never really heard of it. And I was talking to an acting teacher of mine on the phone, and he said, "Have you ever seen Prince of the City?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Oh, this is a movie for actors. This is a monster of a film." And he was right. And it is a monster of a film, and it's extremely complex, and there's a lot to dive into with this. I'm curious, Lumet is all about the through line, all about the essence of the story. And what did you take as the essence of this film?
Well, just really that it's about the moral quandary and sort of the emotional sort of journey that these men were going through, because I mean, given the time that they were policing in and just the time in general, it showed how easily the lines can get blurred from, like we see in the beginning of the film with the Treat Williams character, like getting drugs for one of his informants, which technically is a crime, but again, it's one of those ones that just sort of gets pushed under the blanket in terms to sort of enable larger things, and it gives us a real sort of sense of the moral sort of gymnastics that these men and women have to do probably on a daily basis when they're working in law enforcement at this level, and particularly at that time when in New York corruption was fairly rampant.
Yeah. No, it's true. And what I find so fascinating about the character Treat William plays, Chiello, again, I'm not sure if we mentioned, but this is actually a true story.
It is,
and I think it's almost hard to believe how true it is. And apparently they stayed very close to what actually happened. And what I find so fascinating about it is that it very much is similar in the sense of The Verdict or other films of Lumet, of people trying to redeem themselves of their past wrongs. But it's not, in this guy's case, he does not do it in a simple way, and it's not really his fault. It's because this is not a simple task at hand, because he's a complex guy, and he's basically, as you said, he's breaking a lot of laws. He's basically a criminal. I mean, when you see him off the top with that drug bust, when him and Jerry Orbach and everything, I mean, they're putting those guys' heads through windows, kicking them in the balls. And we see this kind of abuse of power now. Like, what gives you the right to put someone's head through a window? And these people were not armed, but again, it's that attitude of, well, who's going to believe them? Oh, they're going to believe the cops, or they're going to believe the criminals, quote unquote criminals? So, they're racist, they're making racist jokes, and they seem to be enjoying everything, really, to an extent. You really feel that bond. And at the point that Chiello gets called in from the agents to say, will you work with us to investigate police corruption? What's interesting is that he doesn't say yes, and then he calls the guy again for a meeting, and then walks out of a meeting, and then calls that guy again. So obviously something was eating away at him. His guilt was eating away at him. His wrongdoings were eating away at him. And to me, the turning point was that drug bust that you just referenced. Because, here's a guy who suddenly at 3 a.m. gets a phone call that he has to give this drug addict drugs because the guy's, craving it and needs it. And in order to do it, he goes and attacks another guy who also works for him. Like, he knows all these guys. And I think at that point, it was like, what the hell am I doing? I'm a police officer, and I'm waking up at 3 a.m. to illegally give heroin users drugs in order for them to keep helping us. So did you think that was the turning point for him?
Definitely. I would say, like, for me, I think it was actually a little later when he was forced to implicate one of his, not necessarily a partner, because I mean, one of the whole through lines of the film is like, I'll never turn against my partners. I'll never turn against my partners. But he had to turn against a mentor and a friend. And then the man killed himself. And I think for me, that was sort of the real pivot, where it was like, this has gone way too far now.
Yeah.
In all aspects of life, like, this has just gone completely out of control. Like, we're all out of control, be it the guys who are trying to convict us or the cops who are trying to bring, live on the streets and do this sort of thing. That for me was the moment where we really understood how messy this life really
Yeah.
was at that time.
You know, it's all shades of gray. There's no good guys, there's no bad guys. And I love the way it starts just with that heartbeat, which was so great over the credits. And then he's clearly having some kind of a nightmare. And I think that's such a great signal that something is eating away at this guy. When he decides to help them, he does it in a very naive and arrogant way. Like he almost feels as though he can take control of this. And when they warn him at certain times not to wear a wire, he arrogantly says, I think I will. You know, it's like and one of the agents says, are you like, you know, you love the danger, don't you?
Yeah.
So you start to wonder, I get the impression that he didn't think this through enough. He thought that he could just help to an extent and that would be it. But he didn't think past like, what am I going to do after this is over? Am I going to go back to busting and taking money from drug money from heroin dealers with my partners? And there is that moment in the film where suddenly this has been going on for 2 years. And he starts to think, yeah, what was I going to do when this is over? And the reality is it was never going to be over. It was never as simple as he made it out to be. And he makes such an error by lying off the top about, he says he did 3 things that were against the law. And the audience knows that that's bullshit, but we sort of forget in a way. And it comes back to haunt him because he does not, you know, he tells like probably the worst things he did. But then as you see later on, when he was putting people away, drug dealers and addicts and different cops and they had stuff on him. And I'm thinking, how could he not have saw that coming? But I think he probably felt that, I don't know. What did you think? I mean, how could he not have seen that coming? Did that pop into your head?
It makes for such a complex character. And I mean, I think that's what Treat did such a good job with this, because there is that moment in the film where I forget who it is. I think it's the 2 federal agents, or it's the 2 guys who are managing him, who say, I think he's decided that if he gets busted with a wire, he's not fighting back.
Yes, that was an interesting moment.
This was sort of the suicide mission. He was getting his kicks through the danger by trying to take it all down and even take himself down, even if he's in denial about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, the funny thing is, I mean, Treat Williams had a little bit of stardom before he got this job.
Yeah, with Hair, I believe.
But yeah, like, because I mean, he was in Hair and he was in Deadly Hero and he'd done a couple of things and he'd been on Broadway. But this is such a nuanced performance where it goes to such a fragile place, because like, he is this confident, brimming sort of the world can't touch me, balls out cop, but at the same time he's in a system that he has absolutely no control over. And I mean, there's that beautiful scene down by the bridge when he's talking to one of his informants, and but is also a friend, and it's like, what did you do, Danny? What did you do?
Yeah,
I'm gonna give you 75,000. Go start a new life. He says,
that's such a great scene.
What else am I gonna do? And he's like, I don't care about prison. Take me in. It's fine.
Well, what's so fascinating about that part is that's when I started to see he started to really crack, because that was at the point when he was nearly killed. And I mean, he worked on countless cases, and they focus on early in the film. They focus on a couple of those cases. One was with that cop and that really big gangster with the mustache. And the other guy that you're referring to, who was like a mafia guy. Yeah. And when he's so close, nearly gets killed, and they almost kill him. And it's only because his cousin, who is a mafia guy, says, if you think he's a rat, you better know it for sure, because a lot of people like him. In other words, he's basically one of them. So, if you're not 100% sure, don't do it. And the reality is they weren't. But that's at the point when you start to see him panic and he starts to crack. And then he tells that guy, who's basically like a mafia guy. I'm surprised the guy didn't kill him. Maybe he was thinking of killing him. He sort of says, I'll give you money to leave. I mean, maybe he would have met him at the airport and knocked him off. I mean, who knows? I mean, that I was really wondering about. But then he even tells his partners what's happening. I mean, it's one of those things when you have all these secrets and you're harboring them, and eventually they'll spill out. And he doesn't know what the movie totally changes at that point. It's not just him cracking down. It's suddenly, it's like, where's it going to go from here? So I felt that when he panicked, when he was nearly killed, that's when this shit, it gets to the press too, right? Obviously, either one of his partners, the cops, leaked it so that they would have to end it, or the mafia did. I don't know. What did you think? Did you see a real turning point at that point in the film?
To a degree. But I mean, again, I think this goes back to kind of the reason why you and I both love this film, and why it's also never got as much attention on the outside as maybe we probably both think it should, because it's not a movie that happens in flourishes.
Right.
It's not, there aren't these dramatic moments. There isn't the sort of the Pacino flourish or the De Niro flourish.
Yeah.
Williams played it so well and so understated, and that's how it needed to happen to really make it feel emotional and fragile, as opposed to just that we're on the outside looking in at this sort of crime saga. We're basically watching a guy's life fall apart, and he's basically, taking part in dismantling it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm curious, do you think that apart from the fact that he was younger than De Niro and Pacino, I know De Niro was supposed to do this with DePalma. Do you think he was a better choice? Outside of the fact that he wasn't a star and they were, so maybe that would have been a little distract. But do you think that he was a better choice than those two actors?
I think he was, because I think, again, having sort of a semi-fresh face allowed for that vulnerability. And I mean, and the character needed vulnerability.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think sort of the public image of a Pacino or a De Niro had already kind of been set by then.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
And it would have been hard for them to sort of break off from that.
But do you think if they weren't movie stars outside of that, like if they were unknowns like him, do you think that he still was a better choice, aside from the fact that he was better because of his age? It's hard to say. I don't know what you think.
You know what? I mean, I kind of think yes, because
I do too.
You need somebody who was just on the other side of being a pretty boy. You know what I mean? And I mean, I don't mean that in a negative context, but you needed somebody who was just sloping that downward hill of being like, hey, I'm this king, I'm the prince of this, like the guy who just got out of college or the guy who just got out of high school. You needed that guy who was just on the other side of being sort of the king of his small world, and then he became a cop and he became a king of a bigger world, but he was wrong. Like there needed to be that sort of
he has a very he has a flakiness to him naturally.
Exactly.
That I think and some scenes, which is so fascinating with every single character, is that I could hate them at 1 minute and then be sympathetic towards them. And I'm going back and forth. And as I said, there's no good guys, there's no bad guys in this film. I mean, everybody has a point. You can justify what they're doing and understand it, even though there's a lot of right and wrongs in what they're doing. But just going back, there's something that fascinates me about this film in terms of its length. I mean, it was a film that's nearly 3 hours long. I think it was totally necessary, because I think there could have easily had summed up probably an hour or more of this film in a montage. And there were a couple of montages. For example, when he gets a couple of things on tape, you see that he puts it on a file and then they dissolve, where now that file has tons of tapes. And there's another one later where he's meeting lawyer after lawyer after lawyer. You just see how many people he dealt with, how many cases he was involved in. But by focusing on a couple of those cases early on, you really felt the danger he was under, and you really also got to know him so much better. And I don't think you would have saw that he was flaky or that he was arrogant or that he was naive. I think if they had settled those things in montages, he would have looked a lot more self-assured, which would have been much less interesting and much less emotional, in my opinion. I don't know if that stood out to you in terms of the length.
Well, I think it needed sort of that deliberate pace, to be
I
sure.
agree.
And also, I mean, I just think about this even from sort of a Hollywood, a politics standpoint, because he had done before this Just Tell Me What You Want with also Jay Presson Allen, and he had come off the successes of like Dog Day Afternoon, Network, Equus, and then undoubtedly the studio probably talked him into doing The Wiz. And then he had this may have been sort of in the, you know, I'll do one for you and let me do a couple for me kind of thing.
I think so. Yeah. He was very good at that, and he admits, of course, in making movies, his book, I think he only names one of them that he felt, not that he necessarily did it for money, but didn't turn out the way he had hoped, or he knew it wasn't going to work. But he was very successful within the studio system as a guy who was, in my opinion, was a real artist and a great storyteller as well. But what's so fascinating about Chiello, and I know we touched on this, is that, you know, he's somewhat of a cop, he's somewhat of a gangster, and he's even somewhat of a heroin dealer, you know? And he's everything. And you really see that when he arrests the big guy, that big gangster, and the crooked cop who was working with him, because he has to put them through a glass at one point, the door, because the guy pulled a gun out, and he also smashed like a glass over the guy's head and all this kind of stuff. But then in the next moment, the cop says, "Hey, Danny, you think you could get me a deal?" And he's like, "I'll see what I can do." And it was sort of funny in a way, because he actually loved a lot of these guys, and he had an affection for a lot of these guys. And as he felt, he felt a sense of responsibility towards even those drug addicts, because if they needed drugs, he felt that he should help them because they were helping him. So this is what's so fascinating about him. This is not like Serpico, where Serpico was done, and I love Serpico, and Lumet said this. It was part of the reason why he did this was making up for Serpico being more two-dimensional, but I think that was a more two-dimensional story anyways. Whereas here we have a guy who's corrupt, who's well into the corruption, and is trying to make up for it, but is doing it not always in a good way, and then sometimes in a good way. But I found those loyalties and affections he had for so many of these people, gangsters, cops, junkies, that to me is such a fascinating character to see on screen. I don't know if those sort of loyalties stood out to you at all.
Oh no, it absolutely did, because it's one of those things where you understand sort of the mentality. I mean, and again, I'm sure this is probably true to this day. I'm not an expert on, you know, current law enforcement or anything like that, but there is, and probably still is, a percentage of population who go into law enforcement who want to play Prince of the City. They kind of want to walk right on that edge if they can, and they get pleasure out of it. They enjoy it. And Prince's character is definitely sort of fits into that mold. It's such an interesting portrait of sort of the mentality of wanting to get into law enforcement, particularly in a place like New York during that time period, because it wasn't easy. It was dangerous. It was terrifying, and not just from on the outside, but from within as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you know, I think he thinks some of these people, even lawyers, are his friends, and then he learns that, oh wait, he doesn't have any friends at all. And something you touched on, which I find fascinating, is that the early agents he worked with, who I think probably felt felt for him the most, were the most on his side. The guy one of the agents who does say, "I have this theory that if he gets caught, he won't defend himself." What's fascinating about that is but he does get caught and he doesn't kill himself, is that he does go all the way. And as he says, he wouldn't give up his partner, but then he was put in a position where he had to give them up, because once they found out everything about the drugs, and the lawyers, all those lawyers wanted to go after him or indict him, and it was that other guy who, by the way, bit of trivia, was based on Rudy Giuliani, back when he was somewhat of a human. Said to him, the best thing you can do is get your partners to also come in, and they can tell us what they know. Maybe they can cut a deal. And he does it. Everything he says he wouldn't do, he does. And he was forced, was he just gonna die? He had a family, he had kids, he had a wife. And it's never that simple. I thought that was really, really remarkable. Was that because I know you mentioned that point when the agent had that theory, did the fact that he doesn't defend himself, did that really stand out to you, that this guy went all the way, even though he looked like someone who wouldn't?
It did, because for me, and just especially in a portrait of it being sort of the mentality of law enforcement, or the mentality of a police officer, it was the portrait of a man who understood that, okay, to do the job, occasionally you have to bend the rule of law. But he had gone, it was his, like, him not wanting to fight back was his realization that he had gone beyond that.
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. And that he was now, as much as he felt that he wasn't one of these agents, he was. And they tell him that too. Like when he starts to think, oh, I have to get this guy out of narcotics, or this guy, and they say, look, like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be investigating these people, and you can understand why he was trying to help them. What I also find so fascinating was the character of Bob Balaban, who I'm sure a lot of people know from Seinfeld and Midnight Cowboy, who's a great actor. And when we see the district, the attorneys, and also played by James Tolkien, who was the other guy who then wanted to go after Chiello. These guys are so by the book. Because I understand. Yes, he lied. He lied. He committed perjury. He has a record of 86 pages when he said he only did 3 things wrong. But there was, and that scene towards the end when all the lawyers are together and, the judge is hearing their case of whether to indict or not. I love that scene because everybody is right and no one is necessarily wrong. The lawyers have a case to go after him. He committed perjury. Yes, he was helping us. He was supplying information. He put his life on the line. But does that mean that we can let him go on stand and lie under oath? Like, how far, actually they're right. But at the same time, you hate the lawyers because they were so cold. You felt as though they just wanted to go after cops. They just hated cops. I don't know if that popped out to you.
It did. And it's one of those things where I think it really comes into clarity. And I think this might be one of the reasons why the film didn't necessarily do as well as anybody had hoped, is because it's a movie that's about the shades of gray.
Absolutely.
There is, like you say, there's no good guy, there's no bad guy. It exists entirely in the shades of gray. And
it's so shades of gray.
Understand that going in, and audiences might not have been ready for that.
I totally agree, and we still see that, particularly in mainstream cinema. People have a really hard time if they're not being told which way to lean, and this film doesn't tell you to necessarily root for Danny Chiello. And I was watching an interview with Lumet and Jay Presson Allen this morning, and they said they watched the screening where at the end of the film, everyone applauded for Chiello's character, and they were shocked because they thought, well, wait a minute, maybe we did something wrong. You're not this, yes, he did some good things. He did a lot of bad things too. They thought maybe they were applauding out of sympathy. This is the thing. And I'm so fascinated because, as I said, 1 minute I'm totally against a character like Jerry Orbach. And then the next minute I'm totally for him, even when he's like kicking a lawyer and right in the nuts. And I'm like, why am I for him at this point? Which is a great scene, but he was totally wrong. You know, I mean, but you at that point, you start to feel resentful towards the lawyers because you're like, why are you going after Chiello? Yeah, he lied under oath, but he's also basically sticking his neck out every single day, you know, which is what those two agents say early, who worked with him off the top. It's like, how many doctors would do that? How many lawyers would put their life on the line for a cause? But at the same time, is that, you know, can you just say, well, all right, let's look the other way? I mean, I think the judge made the right call. I don't know what you think, but
but I mean, I think that's why the Daniel Chiello character is sympathetic, because we understand how he got lost in sort of the moral ambiguity of it all. Because like you say, yeah, he's a crook, but he did a lot of good things too, but he also did a lot of bad things. Like, you're having to sort of balance the two. Like, does the good outweigh the evil?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. And which makes it such a rich viewing experience. I particularly like those moments. What's so great is that we see some characters very briefly, but yet they added so much to the story. Like his father, for example, we see his father in 2 scenes, and his brother as well. But that was like a story, a rich story within himself. I mean, his brother looked like he was a drug. Yeah, he was a drug addict. And he was basically saying to, when they're fighting off the top, the only difference between me and you is that you're a cop and I'm not, you know, that's why I'm on the streets and you got Rolexes, you know, because you reap the rewards of corruption, and I'm on the other side of that.
I'm the victim of it. Yeah,
and I'm the victim of it. And he's totally right. And you see his father is disappointed in him. And even later, when his cousin is killed, he's not allowed to go to the funeral. And the look on his father's face was tremendous. But those brief scenes, same with the cousin, that scene, the gangster who wouldn't give him up because he was his cousin, and warns him, you know, hey, someone's after you, look the other way. And then of course that guy winds up killed. But every single part, from the smallest part, from the littlest scene, everybody was so detailed, so specific, and carried the forward, not just pushing it forward to a conclusion, but were really added and had a point of view to everything, which I don't know if those small characters were something that were memorable in your mind. I don't know how you felt about that.
Well, they were. I mean, and honestly, I think it's for anybody out there listening, I mean, I think it's a reminder of the old adage that when you're doing storytelling like this, you know, there are no small parts. There's only small actors, and there's no small actors in this film at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. Everybody's fantastic. Lumet said in making movies that he wanted this to have a very realistic look. And he said it's you know, it's harder to do that than people think. And he was often, because he adapted a lot of plays on film, he was often someone that people thought someone they just hit record, which is, you know, we all know is nonsense, right?
Right.
But what's remarkable about his films, is that the style never pops out, which is a good thing, is that the audience should not be conscious of the style like they are in other filmmakers' work. And I think that is perhaps whave he's not a filmmaker that people study on the level of Hitchcock or Kubrick, because you can't see it feels like they don't have much of a style. But he went through painstaking work and details with the DOP, with the screenwriter, with the cameraman, with everybody involved, the editor, to make it invisible, which I don't understand why that's not something that is studied enough. I mean, have you noticed he's someone that people mainly talk about the acting in his films and the stories as opposed to the quality of his filmmaking?
Yeah, but I mean, also when you think about it, to me, from a Lumet standpoint, this is almost the other side of the coin of something like Network.
Yeah.
Where Network had a very like, as much as it's got fantastic performances and driven as such by them, it's about the style and it's about the editing and just it's how the story is presented
right
on the screen in a very sort of kinetic and energetic way. Prince of the City just quietly rolls out.
Yeah, and
it's not a film that's sort of hitting you with anything. It's just kind of happening.
Absolutely, and for him to have achieved that is so remarkable, because when I watch Kubrick, for example, I'm not criticizing him. I'm always aware of they're so stylized, and I think the audience is aware of it. But that's a different kind of filmmaking. That's not to say that that's bad. I just think Lumet never wanted the audience to be aware of the style, but I don't think,
and that is a style.
That is a style, itself. Yeah, absolutely. Like he said in the verdict, like he wanted the colors to always be like brown, orange, the feel of spring, cold. So that goes down to painting the sets. That goes down to where they're going to shoot it, the art decoration, everything. But it doesn't pop in the way that something like Clockwork Orange does. But which is what's remarkable about it. The no style of filmmaking is just, he was someone who understood the medium probably better than a lot of people do, which I think is why. I would agree with that. Yeah. Oh yeah, which I think is why he's so great. This is, I think, only really on YouTube to rent or buy. There is a DVD that exists. Where did you see this?
Well, I mean, there is a DVD that I'd like. The first time I saw it was on DVD, but a few weeks ago they did just release it on Blu-ray.
No way! Oh,
so it is out on Blu-ray. Like I've got my copy right here.
Oh, you got it. Perfect. Yeah. Oh, is that Kino Lorber?
No, it's Warner Archives.
Oh, great. Okay, so it's been released 40 years later. Perfect. Finally,
it is definitely on Blu-ray. So if anybody out there, if you're in the Toronto area, I recommend Bay Street Video. But it is out there on Blu-ray, and it is one of those movies that, like we've been saying, it's the style of no style, and it lets us see the characters as opposed to see sort of how they're trying to visually engage us, because I mean, this is very much a dirty film.
Yeah,
it's not a pretty looking film, but that's kind of the point.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, it's got that grit. I wonder if this had come out 5 years earlier. This is 81, so we're very much in the blockbuster era. I wonder if this was 5-10 years earlier, like with Serpico, if it would have done better. But to me, it's I mean, I love Serpico, but to me, it's a much more interesting film. If I had to choose between the two, I probably would choose this. But then again, I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare it, because on the surface,
it's apples and oranges. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, and the thing is that even when this came out, that's what they kept comparing it to. Well, it's the review was like, well, it's not as good as Serpico. But it's not Serpico. It's totally different. But it is what it is. But hey, I mean, if people haven't seen it, it now is easily accessible on Blu-ray. And there's a digital copy on YouTube, which is the one I have. And yeah, fantastic. But I love it. I think it's a fantastic film, and you can read more about it in Lumet's Making Movies book. So great. Dave, thanks so much. I'm glad that you came on again so soon. Where's the best place for people to find you on social media? I know you're on Twitter, Instagram. What are your handles?
Basically at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And obviously you can visit us over at intheseats.ca for basically what we're covering, which there's a lot of festivals going on right now. And obviously we're heading into the end of the year push with a bunch of high profile movies coming out. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah, check out Dave's podcast as well, and his website for all the latest reviews. And his podcast talks to various people in the industry about film and TV, which is really engaging and a lot of fun. So Dave, yeah, thanks again. Come again soon to do another one for sure.
My pleasure, and absolutely, boss. Just let me know.
Great. No, thanks so much. And for those of you watching, thank you. And if this is your first time on my podcast, I also have a Patreon membership. Just go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details on how to become a member. There's also an audio version of this podcast. So if you're heading out, you can listen to the audio version. There isn't as many episodes on the audio version. So head over to YouTube if you want to hear more, and it's available on all of the different platforms. And if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel. It's absolutely free to do so. The channel explores storytelling on film from movies from all over the world. Just click on the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo, which you will see floating above my head to your top left. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release a new video or when I go live. Thanks so much, folks. We'll see you in the next episode.
Like and subscribe, people. It's the two biggest words in our business.